Well, hello again. Welcome to Horror in Detail. Today we are going to share Wendigo and cryptids encounter stories. First story. This story was shared by you/Violet Strider, so credits to him. Witnessed a witch near my house with multiple people. I grew up in a rural part of Maryland, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone within 10 square miles, and it took 30 minutes to get to the nearest department store. Our house was positioned between a cornfield and a forest. The road leading to my house was about 6 miles long, and the only people who ever drove down it were the handful of people that lived back there, and the occasional archaeological van that would do digs in the plot next to our house when the farmers would turn the fields over. We had a few paranormal experiences in that house. I'll briefly mention a few of those before telling you the story behind the title of this post. One day I was in my room upstairs playing piano and I heard a loud bang on the wall outside my room. My parents said something like, "What the hell was that?" And when I walked out of the room to ask them the same thing, my piano started playing the pre-installed demo songs completely unprompted. It freaked all of us out enough that we called my brother who was in college at the time to tell him about it, and years later he let us know that when we called him that night, he heard a deep laugh in the background of the phone call and was too afraid to tell us about it at the time. Another odd occurrence was when I was sitting in the sunroom and watched my brother walking through the front yard toward the door. I turned and looked into the living room only to see my actual brother sitting on the couch wearing a different shirt than the doppelganger that walked by the window. My parents would also hear me talking in the house pretty frequently when they knew I wasn't home. Anyways, in 8th grade I had this witch experience that I haven't been able to shake, and I had other people with me. My friend's dad was driving me home in his 3-seater truck with my friend sitting between us. We got to the stretch of road where we could see my house across the field. They planted soybeans that year so the corn wasn't blocking our view, and in the ditch right by the road was a figure I can only describe as a witch. We all saw her. We drove right past her. The ditch lining the road was about 2 feet deep and somewhat overgrown, and we could only see the upper half of her body, as if she were sitting cross-legged in the ditch. She was wearing an off-white nightgown that was stained brown, and her hair was black and tangled. She was looking up into the sky, with her arms extended toward the sky, and she was rocking in a circular motion. I know it sounds fucking ridiculous, but all 3 of us were totally uncomfortable. My friend's dad was rough around the edges, carpenter, no bullshit kind of guy. I remember really feeling scared when he asked us, what the hell was that? She didn't look like a homeless person, or a drug addict, and we were so far from any town we literally never had a single person in the 20 years I lived there wander into our area who didn't belong there. She legit looked like she came from another time period and was sitting in our ditch trying to summon a fucking tornado. When we got home my friend's dad walked us inside, which he didn't normally do because my parents didn't socialize with my friend's parents. He came in almost as if he wanted to kill time to not drive back by her again. He told my parents what we had seen, and we couldn't see her from our house, so we called the police just in case it was someone in need of psychiatric help. My friend and his dad left after a couple minutes, and the police came about 20 minutes later and said they didn't see anyone in the ditch and couldn't find anyone walking in the fields or roads in the surrounding area. My friend's dad called us once they got home, and said that by the time they drove by the spot on their way home, she was gone. I truly cannot explain it. My friend's dad has since passed, but my friend says they still talked about it every now and then in the years following. I think I got caught up in the rhyme, witch and ditch. I don't know what to call her, what I saw, which is why I'm posting here. Didn't mean to insult witches. Also, for those who think I just saw a wandering person, besides it not making geographical sense, I didn't emphasize enough just how otherworldly she felt because frankly how to describe it. It was the way she moved, the way she didn't even glance at the car, it was a feeling beyond ominous, she looked like she came from another plane. Second story. This story was shared by you/Gaitenkas 2007, so credits to him. How I survived and killed a Wendigo. My family was shocked when we heard our Uncle Benjamin was found dead in the woods surrounding his vacation home. I didn't know him very well, as he lived far away from most of the family. So, I only saw him at family meetings. His funeral wasn't a big event, there were my two aunts, Lucy and Laura, my other uncle Stephen and my little nephew, Mikey. In Ben's will was written that I got his vacation home. I figured that it was nice to spend some time in a place where there was no distraction, as I had to study for my exams. Also, if I would rent a small apartment, I would probably have to live off instant noodles and water for a few months. The day after the funeral I packed up my things so that I could move to my new home. The drive itself was uneventful, though I did underestimate the length of the drive. When I was driving through the woods, I thought that I saw a face or two amongst the trees, but I just blamed it on my mind for being a bit sleepy, as it was around 11 p.m. when I arrived. Once I was there, I put all the food I had in the fridge and made my bed so I could sleep. When I woke up the next day I showered, made some breakfast, and hopped in front of the TV to watch a show on Netflix. Halfway through my show I thought I heard barking coming from the woods but didn't think anything of it as I thought it was coming from my show. However, the barking did not stop, so I decided to check it out. I walked a bit in the direction I thought it was coming from, but I couldn't find anything. So, I shrugged and walked back. The rest of the day was uneventful. I did however sort out a few moving boxes. As it was getting kind of late, I decided to watch one more episode of my show and head to bed afterwards. The next day started off normal. I showered, ate breakfast, and started to unpack a few boxes, however around 10 a.m. I heard it again, barking. This time I knew it wasn't just my mind playing tricks on me, as I heard it loud and clear. I directly stopped unpacking and went to investigate the noise. When I went into the woods, to check out the sound, I found a tiny Labrador pup. It was covered in mud and scratches. I knew I couldn't just leave him there, so I took him home. I gave him a bath to get all the mud and filth off him and then I took him to the closest vet, which was about 5 miles away. Once we arrived, I took a seat in the waiting room. I couldn't help but notice that the other people in the room had a small look of judgment towards me. I totally understood why, as the pup looked like he had been attacked. When it was our turn, I heard a soft whimper coming from the pup, but he did decide to walk with me to the room. After a few checkups the vet asked me if I owned the pup. I said no and that I found him in the woods. The vet went quiet for a second and asked me if I wanted him to check for a chip. I said yes and the vet checked, but found no chip. So, I suggested that if he didn't belong to anyone, I could take care of him. The vet sighed and went to get the papers for me to fill in, so I could take the pup home. On the way home I went to the local pet store, to buy some toys, food and a food and water bowl. After buying all the stuff I would need to take care of him, I thought of a name for him. After about 5 minutes of thinking I came up with the perfect name. Winston. I called out. Winston directly jumped up from his seat and started barking and wagging his tail. When we got home, I directly put everything in place. I put his dog bed next to the couch with some toys, and his food and water bowl in front of the TV. After that long day I was very tired, so I decided to watch a few episodes of my show. When I sat down, Winston started whining whilst wagging his tail. I asked, "Do you want to sit next to me?" He answered the question with a happy growl and jumped on the couch beside me. I watched TV until it was around 10 p.m. and decided to go to bed. I decided to put Winston's bed in the bedroom next to me for the first night, so that he could get used to the house. When I woke up the next morning, I noticed that Winston's bed was empty and that the bedroom door was open. I thought that he had walked through the door to watch the birds through the giant window in the living room. However, when I went to check, I didn't see him. But then I noticed that the front door was wide open. Even though I knew I locked it the previous night. My heart dropped, I panicked and ran out of the door to find him. After about 20 minutes of searching, I finally found him with a leaf he found in his mouth. I picked him up and carried him inside. It was near lunchtime, so I decided to put a frozen pizza in the microwave. I was very hungry as I hadn't eaten anything for breakfast. After eating, I took Winston for a walk, but he kept on looking into the tree line, as if something were there. Each time I thought he saw something, I looked, but couldn't see anything. After about 10 minutes of walking, I decided to head back to the house. I am glad I made that decision, because right after I closed the door behind us it started storming, the sky became a brown/yellow color, and I could see the clouds rolling over. I'd seen this weather only once before. I was visiting a friend that moved to the Netherlands, then I first saw this type of weather. I decided to make some hot chocolate for myself and sat down on the couch, to binge-watch my show for a while. Winston was sleeping right next to me. After a while I fell asleep too, but I was awakened by Winston, whining by the front door. I decided to check up on him and noticed that he was shivering from fear. I looked through the window of the front door and saw nothing. I figured it was some deer walking by, that had spooked the little pup. I picked Winston up and carried him to the couch, so I could cuddle him to ease his nerves. The next morning, I woke up early and decided to do an early morning walk with Winston. After walking a bit, I saw a pack of deer just roaming around in an open area in the forest. This only reinforced my thought of Winston being scared from some deer just roaming around on our property. However, when we came back from our walk, I noticed something different about the front door. Scratch marks. Upon closer inspection I saw that the scratches were massive. They were all about 10 inches long and 1 inch deep. Now I'm no expert in forest animals, but I dang well knew that those didn't belong to a deer. I decided to call a door repairman to fix it. They arrived about 30 minutes. "Those are some massive marks on your door, bud," one of the men said. "Yeah, I would get something for protection if I were you," the other one said. I followed his advice and later bought a small pistol, to protect myself and Winston. After I got back from the gun store the men were already done with the door. I gave them a "thank you," and they left. The following day started off normal. I woke up, had an early shower, and decided to do another early walk with Winston. I saw 2 squirrels fighting over some pine cones, a flock of birds flying in the opposite direction of my house, and I think I spotted a small mouse running through the freshly fallen leaves. However, Winston was shivering against my leg, whining. I asked what was wrong and he basically jumped. I decided then and there to head back. I heard something growl in the distance and another flock of birds flew in the opposite direction of the sound. When I was back on my property, I noticed something weird. My front door was ripped from its hinges and was lying about 3 meters to the left. I directly pulled my pistol out of my pocket because I didn't know if, who or whatever, had left yet. When I walked into the house, I froze. There were scratches everywhere. Whatever had done this, had enormous claws. Upon closer inspection I noticed that the claw marks were the exact same as the ones on the door from yesterday. I also noticed that my fridge door was hanging from its hinges. When I looked in the fridge, I saw that it was a mess. All the meat was gone, and all the drawers were ripped out of the fridge. I put the front door back in its place using the tools I had recently unpacked and fixed up the fridge. After I was done, I decided to take a little break, so I sat on the couch with my drink. After a while I moved my arm only to touch something wet and squishy. I jumped and looked at what I had touched. It was the body of a squirrel, well, at least what was left of it. The squirrel was mangled in gruesome ways. A part of its skull was missing, its intestines were hanging out of its stomach and its hind legs were broken. However, it didn't bleed anymore. I guess all the blood was soaked into the couch. I cleaned up the blood and buried the squirrel. I put a small stick on the grave as a sign of respect. After that I decided it was time to pack my things. When I was about halfway done with putting everything in boxes it was already late in the evening. I figured it wouldn't hurt to stay here one more night, but I was very wrong about that. I was woken up by Winston. He had jumped on the bed to hide with me. He was shivering and whining because he sensed that something was wrong. I stood up. Winston let out a bark to warn me. God, I should have listened. I went to the front door as Winston was looking right at it. I looked through the window and saw something big. It looked like a deer, but I knew it wasn't one. It had massive antlers and a skull-like face, and the smell, oh God, the smell. It smelled like a corpse that had been rotting out in the sun for days. When I heard another bark coming from Winston, the thing looked up and tried to smash the door with its head. I directly pulled out my pistol and fired 2 shots. The thing howled in pain and ran away. After that thing ran away, I began to grab my stuff. I grabbed the most important things that I would need, picked up Winston and ran to my car. When I opened the car door, I heard the thing let out a cry behind me. I didn't look back. I hopped in my car and drove off. I'm glad that there wasn't much traffic on the road, as I was going about 90 miles an hour. I mean, can you really blame me for it? I wanted to get out of there as fast as possible. While driving to get out of the woods, I saw the trees flash by. It reminded me of the first night I got here, however it looked much different in the daytime. It also reminded me of the face I had seen amongst the trees. I now know it wasn't my mind playing tricks on me that night, as the face I had seen looked exactly like the face of that thing. Lost in thought, I wasn't paying much attention on the road, however I was directly awakened by the sudden movement in the trees. When I looked towards the movement I jumped in my seat. That thing suddenly jumped in front of my car. I screamed. The creature looked at me and lunged towards me. I slammed the gas pedal and drove around the creature. It stared right at me with its hollow eyes as I drove past. 4 hours later I was back in my hometown. I figured I would go to my aunt and Uncle Lucy and Stephen. But then I remembered that Mikey was allergic to dogs. So, I went to my other Aunt Laura. I figured that she would like the company of me and Winston because of the sudden passing of her brother. I texted her. I was coming over and that I was taking my new friend with me. She told me that it was nice for me to come over, but then she asked me why I would drive all that way just to see her. I told her that I would explain when I got there. After about 20 minutes of driving, I arrived at her place. She opened the door and looked at my face. "What's wrong, sweetie?" she asked me. I guess I was still looking a bit frightened after today's events. I asked if we could go inside. She agreed and we sat on the couch. "Is that your new friend?" she asked, looking at Winston. I told her yes and that his name was Winston. "That's a cute name," she said. Then she asked why I was here and why I looked so pale. I told her everything. I told her about Winston, about that monster and about all the weird stuff that happened. She went silent for a bit. Then she asked me if I could describe the appearance of the thing. I told her about the antlers, the skull-like face, and the smell. After I told her about it, she looked terrified. She told me that my uncle called her multiple times about a giant creature roaming around on his property, and the next day he was found dead near his vacation home. She then told me that there were massive claw marks on his corpse and that he was hanging from his intestines, which were pulled out of his stomach. I was shocked. I asked if she had a laptop or computer I could use. She said yes and that she would go and get it for me. She came back with her old laptop and gave it to me. I opened Google and searched for the creature. After about 10 minutes of searching I found out what kind of creature it was. It was called a Wendigo. After reading some bit, I knew that the creature that had attacked me was a Wendigo. I told Laura and she was as pale as a ghost. We talked some more about all the events of the past week, but after about 20 minutes Winston started whining. My aunt just chalked it up to Winston still being young, but I knew that wasn't the case. I told Laura that we needed to go, and she asked why. I told her that there was no time, but she insisted that she was going to stay. Then she looked at the window. Looking back through the kitchen window was the Wendigo. She screamed. I tried to run after her, but she was too fast. She ran out of the front door, only to face the Wendigo. What happened next will haunt me for the rest of my life. The Wendigo opened its mouth and roared. Then it unhinged its jaw and bit her head clean off. Winston almost ran out of the door, but I picked him up just in time. The creature looked at me and grinned. I could still see pieces of my aunt on its teeth. I ran for the back door and out on the street. I didn't stop running until I could taste blood in my mouth. After checking if everything was safe, I collapsed underneath an oak tree. I was woken up in the morning by Winston. After remembering what had happened the previous day, I started crying. Winston curled up beside me to ease my nerves. "I'm glad you're here with me, buddy," I said. After fully waking up, I figured that the best thing to do was to go back to my car and drive far away from here. However, when I was back at Aunt Lara's house, I saw that my car was turned into a wreck. The windows were smashed, the metal had been turned into shreds and one of my car doors was hanging loose. I checked the back seat and saw that my bag was intact. I had left all my money in the bag, so it was nice that I still had it with me. After grabbing my bag, I headed towards the shopping mall to buy some food, as I had left all my food in the vacation house. While walking, I realized that the Wendigo had most likely followed me. I decided to head to the library to learn more about the beast, mostly on how to get rid of it. When I entered, the nice librarian greeted me. I asked if there were any books about the Wendigo. She told me that she would check, and I gave her a thank you. After a while she told me that there were 2 books in the horror section and 1 in the mythology section. I thanked her and headed to the horror section to find them. After searching for about 8 minutes, I found them. Once I was done, I headed to the mythology section to find the last book. Then I headed to the exit. The librarian asked me if I had a pass and I told her no, but that I had money. She scanned the books and I left. I decided to head to the grocery store afterwards, as I noticed it was lunchtime already. I bought a sandwich for myself and some treats for Winston. After eating, I decided to head to the local park to walk Winston. I walked about 10 minutes, until I found a bench and decided to sit down and read the books I bought. When I opened the first book, I directly looked up on how I could kill the beast. When I couldn't find anything, I opened the second book. After looking, I didn't find anything either. I opened the last book that I had gotten from the mythology section. When I searched, I found information on how to kill the Wendigo. I directly went to the page and read that I needed silver bullets or a silver weapon. I remembered that there was a gun store about 1 mile away, so I decided to pack my things and head in that direction. When I entered the store, I asked if they had silver bullets. They told me they had and that they would go and look for me. Sometime later they came back and put a small box on the counter in front of me. I knew that it was going to be pricey, but I had enough money to buy 10 bullets. I also bought a new gun, as I figured that my pistol was too small to even fit the bullets. After I made my purchase, I walked out of the door and was greeted by Winston, who was wagging his tail happily. I told him that we were finally safe and that I was going to protect him no matter the cost. He let out a bark of joy and we walked off. After my little trip to the gun store, it was almost evening. I knew I had enough time to get ready for the fight with the Wendigo. I put 3 of my bullets in the gun and waited. After about 6 minutes of waiting, Winston started whining. I knew then and there that the beast was close. I stood up and turned off the safety of my gun. I heard the thing roar in the distance. I looked in the direction of the sound, and there it was, the Wendigo. I immediately fired 2 shots and the beast howled out in pain and it started charging towards me. I fired another shot, which gave me enough time to reload. I put another 3 bullets in the gun and fired all of them a second later. One of the bullets had hit its leg and another its eye. It collapsed and it cried out in pain. Winston started throwing a barking fit, which agitated the beast more, but it couldn't do anything as one of its legs was broken. I loaded another 3 bullets in the gun and fired the final 3 shots right into its heart. It fell unconscious, but I knew it wasn't dead as I had read that I needed to cut the heart out. I grabbed my survival knife and walked towards the hell spawn. I stabbed the rest of its legs and slit its throat, then I began carving in its chest to get to the heart. After about 20 minutes of cutting, I had finally cut out the heart. I put the heart in my bag and headed back to Winston. Winston was hiding on the other side of the rock, where I had waited for the beast. Once he heard my voice call out, he started sprinting towards me. I kneeled and he started giving me kisses. I cleaned my hands in the nearby lake and we headed towards the nearest motel to sleep. When I woke up the next day, I showered, had breakfast, and headed to the nearest church so I could bury the heart. When I showed it to the nuns there, they escorted me to a burial place. I grabbed a shovel and started digging. After about 5 minutes of digging, I had created a big enough hole to bury the heart in. I put the heart in the hole and closed it. Then I went to the nearby field to pick 2 flowers. An oxeye daisy for my uncle and a buttercup for my aunt, as it was her favorite flower. I walked back to the grave and placed down the flowers. I then went to my Aunt Lucy and my Uncle Stephen. I told them about everything. When I was done talking, they were speechless. I couldn't blame them, as I knew that the story would shock them. After they processed the story, they asked me if I was okay. I told them that I was still a bit shocked from everything that has happened. After we were done talking, they showed me the room I could stay in and then asked me if I could keep Winston away from Mikey, as he was allergic. I told them that it would be no problem as Winston was very well behaved. After we had lunch together, I asked if they had a laptop I could use. Uncle Stephen went to get it for me, as me and my aunt chatted for a bit. A minute later Stephen came back with a laptop and handed it over to me. I then excused myself from the table and went to my room, where I began typing this story, to get this message out to everyone. All I have to say is this. Listen to your instincts. It saved my life and I believe it could also save many others as well. If you notice some strange things in the woods, get out of there as quick as you can, it's hunting you. Third story. This story was shared by you/Ilavimicat, so credits to him. Sinister beings in the Oklahoma forests. I'm so excited to see Mom. My daughter exclaimed. I know you are, honey. Come on now, get in the car. To give you all a little backstory, my name is Michael. My wife divorced me 2 years ago due to me having a crippling drug addiction. Over the course of these 2 years, I became a better person. I stopped taking drugs and hanging out with my old pals, all in the hopes that my wife will come back to me one day. That day never came. One day, I got a call from my ex saying that my daughter missed me and really wanted to see me. After all, you can't keep a child from seeing their own father. I drove 4 hours to Springfield to pick her up and went back home. She stayed with me for 2 weeks. We went to the arcade, the movies, her favorite restaurant, and I even bought her a few dolls here and there. Anyways, the 2 weeks passed by quickly, and it's time to take her back to her mother. You sure you got everything you need, sweetie? This'll be a long drive. Yes, Dad. Can we go now? Of course we can. I started my car and began driving. I lived in Oklahoma City, and my ex lived in Springfield, Missouri. It's a 4-hour-long drive that involves going through the Oklahoma Ancient Forest, which is where we encountered them. Hey Dad, look Buzz buzz. Oh hey, your mother is calling. I picked up the phone and accepted the call. Hi. Hello, Michael. So how's Haley? Did she have fun? Yeah, she's alright. We went to movies, the arcade, I even bought her some new toys. Can I talk to her? Haley, here, your mother wants to talk to you. Hi sweetie, did you have F? Dad, watch out. Brakes squealing bang. Hello. Hello. Haley. Michael. We crashed the car, I passed out. The last thing I heard was my ex's worried voice over the phone. I woke up in my house, I was arguing with Samantha. Please Michael. Please. Go to rehab Michael. You have to stop, please. You have to stop for the sake of our little Haley. Please listen to me. I can't. I tried. Then I can't be with you, Michael, I want a divorce. No Samantha, baby, please. I'm trying. Dad. Dad. Dad, wake up. Dad. What happened? We crashed into an elk, Dad. Oh my God. Oh God. Haley. Haley, are you hurt, sweetie? Only a little. Is the elk still alive? Yes, Dad. I think it's hurt. I grabbed my pistol out of the glove box and got out of the car. I saw the elk, covered in blood and barely breathing. Poor thing. Oh, you poor, dumb animal. Haley, close your eyes. Bang. Dad. Why did you shoot it? To put it out of its misery. I moved the elk out of the road and got back in the car. I pressed the gas pedal, but the car didn't move. You gotta be kidding me. I went out of the car and popped the hood open. The engine seemed okay. As I was opening the car door, I heard tree branches rustling and something rapidly approaching me. Fearing for the worst, I turned around and aimed my pistol in the direction of the sound with my finger on the trigger. Suddenly, the noise stopped. I sighed a sigh of relief. Maybe it was just a wild animal. Amidst all the chaos, I didn't seem to notice that Haley didn't make a noise as all that happened. I turned around to find a broken windshield, and Haley nowhere to be found. Haley? Haley, where are you, sweetie? Haley? I took a flashlight and an extra round of ammunition out of the glove box. I put the magazine in my pocket, turned on the flashlight, and began frantically looking for my daughter. Eventually, I saw the beam from my flashlight hit something. Haley? I said in a distraught voice. Haley, is that you? I got no response. I decided to keep on walking to whatever the thing was until its appearance became more clear as I approached. It was a girl all right, but not Haley. She looked much older, maybe 15 or 16. She was wearing a dirty white hospital gown, and her flesh seemed to be rotting. When I got close enough to clearly see the side of her head, I knew that there was no way in hell that thing was human. I slowly turned around and tried to walk back, but it was too late. It let out an ear-piercing demonic screech that I cannot describe. As I heard it rapidly approaching me, I knew that running was no good. I aimed my gun and fired half the mag at it until it finally collapsed. Thoughts started rushing through my brain. Did these things take Haley? What if they killed her? She's probably shivering out of fear right now. As my brain was processing what just happened, I heard a loud scream coming from the forest. Haley! Oh my God, that's Haley! I ran as fast as I could in that direction. I ignored the pentagrams and Wendigo skulls hung up on the trees and kept on running towards the direction of the noise, pistol in hand. Suddenly, the fog cleared, the light of the midnight moon shined through the forest. The joy I felt was soon replaced by dread as I saw strange beings around me. There were at least 5 of them. One seemed to look like a Wendigo, the other had the body of a horse and the torso of a human. The only thing I could say about the third one was that he had a tall, slender humanoid body, wore a maroon hoodie with a black cape and carried a strange object in his hand. The fourth one was a fat humanoid figure. In his hand was a rotting, half-eaten corpse of a cat. The fifth one was an old woman. She was tall. Very tall. She wore a black dress and had black paint under her eyes. As I stood in the middle of those creatures, I knew I was hopeless. There's no way the 10 bullets I had left would take out those hideous things. I blinked and saw them all standing not 5 inches away from me. I started shivering, thinking about how gruesome my death will be. They all started chanting something in some sort of language I could not describe. I felt hopeless until the old woman raised her hand, and I saw Haley. Haley! Dad? Dad, help! Let us go! What do you want from us? Why are you doing this to us? Let us go! The old woman grabbed Haley and gave her to the fat one. I saw my daughter screaming her lungs out as the thing bit off her limbs one by one. No! Leave her alone! Haley! Ah! It sounded like the woman was laughing. Eventually, my daughter's corpse was dropped right in front of me. So you killed her, now kill me. Kill me. Kill me too. They started to walk away. This was sent to me by an anonymous Reddit user on the 17th of May. I was scrolling through Reddit, not a day later, when I found a post saying the dead body of a man was found in the Oklahoma ancient forest. His death was determined to be suicide via gunshot to the head. Fourth story. This story was shared by you/no pollution 2644, so credits to him. We were renovating my father's house and found a secret room. To say my father, Dennis Hargrove, was different would be like saying getting pepper sprayed was mildly unpleasant. It communicates the idea but not nearly to the extreme that it's true. Dad was so wildly eccentric no woman could ever put up with him. Mom left him when I was 4, never saw her again, and I'm pretty sure that's as long as any woman ever stayed with him. Years of a successful medical practice meant Dad had a lot of money, and even more land, and he wasn't a bad-looking dude, so getting women was a walk in the park, getting them to stick around was a nightmare. Mary, the woman he was with until he died, stayed with him until the end, but I could see she hated him. She never came in the same room as him without a scowl on her face. When he finally passed after a long, arduous fight with heart disease, she vanished. She was no spring chicken herself. I had offered for her to stay in the house as long as she needed. My wife and I weren't moving in, and the only response we ever received was, "I'll not be in this house one damn second after that old bastard passes." Now that Dad's gone and the place is vacant, my wife, Jenny, and I decided to gut the old place and fix it up. It'll make a nice rental property. She and I never had any kids, so we don't need a place this big, plus we have no real desire to leave the city. It's a nice old home, but it was very dated. Shag carpet, spiral staircase, wood panels on the walls, it's like a Sears catalog from the 70s vomited into this place. For all of Dad's money and his constant attempts to keep up with the Joneses my whole life, he never would do anything to house that involved any real work. All new appliances and furniture, but couldn't bring himself to get rid of the hideous green plastic tiles that lined the shower walls. Our renovation began in the living room, working our way through the kitchen, the bathroom, and the master bedroom when Jenny noticed something weird. "Honey, have you ever noticed this wall isn't farther than the wall in the bathroom? That's an exterior wall, shouldn't they be in the same place?" "No," I replied, "I never noticed. That's how it's always been. Think the water heater is in there or something?" "No, the water heater is in that alcove next to the washer and dryer." We stood and contemplated for a minute. We weren't going to bust down the drywall on that wall. Every other wall had that stupid wood paneling but this one, but I looked at Jenny and said, "Ah, what the hell?" and swung my hammer through the drywall. It gave way with no effort, so much so I almost fell through it when my hammer didn't meet any resistance. I knocked a few more holes in the wall, and stuck my head and a flashlight through the hole. "Hey! There's a staircase in here." "No way. Where does it go?" I didn't know this place had a basement. "It doesn't," I replied, "at least I don't think it does." So, we knocked the rest of the drywall out until we had a hole big enough we could both fit through. We grabbed our flashlights and headed down the staircase. "What do you think is down here, baby?" "Think this is where your dad stored all his gold bars? Huge wads of cash. Vintage porn collection," Jenny said, coughing. The dust was getting stirred as we made our descent. Jenny coughed and itched as we went down. Poor girl was allergic to everything. She'd always joke about how I was never sick and she always was. I'm not sure, dear. I've never known this was here. I'm sure he had it sectioned off for a good reason." At the bottom of the steps was a large steel door with a padlock on it. Dad had the same lock on his chest of war relics he had in the attic, so I tried the key and we walked into the basement that never was. It was pitch black. We shined our lights around to find a light switch, but found several candles. I used my cigarette lighter to light a few to give us enough light to see. The basement was an open floor, with tapestries and wheeled bookshelves everywhere. Tucked in one corner were several boy-sized wooden mannequins. "Tim, what is all of this stuff?" "I'm not sure, looks like an old collection of books on world religions, mysticism, the occult, alchemy, you name it." "What was your dad doing with all of this?" "I thought he was Catholic." "He is, or was?" "I'm not really sure. Most of these books look like they haven't been touched in years. Actually, I don't think anything down here has." "Hey, look. There's a desk over here in the corner, looks like your dad's handwriting on some of these pages." I approached the desk and fumbled around the papers. Most of them were letters from men with names I couldn't pronounce, most likely from other countries. They all dealt with Eastern mysticism, resurrection of the dead, every terrible thing you can imagine. "Tim," Jenny asked, "was your dad practicing some kind of black magic?" "I'm not sure." I thumbed through more of the papers. "Hey. Here's a letter from Mom. Dated 1976. You were what, 5 then?" "Yeah, that's about a year after she left." "Well, what does it say?" I glossed over the letter as quickly as I could. She's telling Dad she still loves him, but she'll never forgive him for what he's done. For creating some kind of monster. "What monster?" "Tim, I really think your dad was into some serious shit here if your mom left him for it." "I know, and I'm not sure. Dad was always pretty normal." "I have no idea what she's talking about." We scoured the papers and the documents Dad had sitting around. I inspected the mannequins. They were all covered with runes and glyphs, no doubt related to some of the black magic Dad was studying. Jenny sat in the corner combing through papers while I continued to snoop around. "Tim, I think I have something." "What's that?" "In all your dad's letters he seems like he's trying to knock on a very particular door. Here's one your dad translated where some Eastern mystic talks about rescuing a soul from the afterlife, bringing it back to this dimension. Then this man from Cambodia is telling him how to bind souls to mannequins, see, and all these symbols he's put at the bottom dash. 5th story. This story was shared by you/anonymity1_11, so credits to him. The Wendigo. Randy stumbled under the weight of the camping gear, grabbing at shrubbery to keep from tumbling down the hill. I looked back at him, sighing softly before I made my way over to his tiny frame, sliding over brightly colored leaves. Reaching around him, I attempted to grab the strap of one of the packs, beginning to lift it from his shoulders. "Here. Let me take dash, no." His brown hair, the same shade as his brother's, masked his eyes as he shook the pack violently, displacing my grip. "I can do it myself." I frowned slightly, my hands still poised above the strap as Randy straightened the pack on his shoulders. "Randy, you should know better than to let a lady carry the weight," a deep voice called from behind us. Randy and I both turned to see Kyle, clucking his tongue in disapproval, as he pulled himself forward by a small tree that shook under his weight. "Now go on up the hill. It's not that heavy. You're 13 now, a man. So I don't want any complaints." Randy nodded vigorously, flushed face steeling itself to iron as he continued on. "He's not one of your pledges, Kyle. He's your younger brother. Chelsea. I'm just toughening him up a bit. There's no harm in it." I folded my arms across my chest, pursing my lips in disapproval. Jack laughed from behind Kyle, bear crawling up the remainder of the hill before pulling 2 beers from his pack and offering one to me. "Lighten up, Chels. We're just messing around." I eyed Jack warily before taking the beer and popping the tab. A loud thud echoed from the peak of the hill, the three of us turning to see Randy on his stomach, uprooting a small bush as he attempted to clamber to his feet. Jack and Kyle threw each other a smirk before racing up the remainder of the hill, shouting commands at Randy as they went. Running my hand through my hair in exasperation, I turned my eyes to the sky as I meandered forward, surveying the stars and full moon. It was amazingly bright that evening, a perfect night for camping. I'd always been fond of the woods. Throughout my high school years, I was prone to disappear beneath the looming branches, failing to resurface for hours at a time. They had been my safe haven, offering sanctuary from the most tiresome of tests and petty high school struggles, but that night, something was off. I couldn't help but feel small, vulnerable in the vast expanse before me. It was as if on that evening, the wind bit just a tad harder, the trees rustled just a decibel louder, and the shadows danced just a bit more wildly. "We're here!" Kyle exclaimed, as Randy threw the gear down, bending forward to rest his hands on his knees and spitting onto the muddy ground. The tree before us had been massive, its roots creeping over the surrounding earth, twisting over its surface before diving back beneath the hard clay. Its size, although impressive, was merely an afterthought to the tear that extended directly down the center of the trunk, the bark an ashy black along the edges of the now gaping hole. The split itself was big enough for at least two people to stand in comfortably and, somehow, had managed to not pose much of a detriment to the tree as its branches stretched forward, leaves golden and red. "So this is it? An old tree?" Jack laughed, shaking his messy blonde hair in disapproval. "There's a good story. Save it, Kyle. Nature's calling. I'll listen to your horrifying story later." Jack waved his hands in mock terror before slinking into the expansive greenery before us, disappearing into the abyss. I finished my own beer before setting it down on a rock, wandering over to where Randy stood, tussling his hair affectionately as he shot me a smile. "All right, well, since Jack seems to feel like being a dick tonight," Kyle raised his voice slightly on the last three words, turning to look behind him with a smirk, "I guess I'll just tell the two of you." I rolled my eyes at Kyle's dramatics but felt Randy straighten up a bit, leaning in. Many, many years ago, there was a tribe of Indians that lived in the marshlands. Now, there have been many tribes to come from the southern marshes, but this specific tribe was of particular note. It wasn't because they were the best warriors, the most adept at survival, or even had the best folktales. In fact, compared to the surrounding tribes, they were rather historically insignificant as a whole. No, this tribe is only known because of one thing and one thing only: this tribe was cursed. It was plagued by a disease that turned men into murderous beasts that stalked the night in madness. Such curses are hardly happened upon, and when those, who were brave enough, would ask about the origin of the curse, the only response from the other tribes was that there had once been a violation of nature, so perverse and so heinous that men were forced to wear their transgression in the form of a transformation. Although the original perpetrators of this crime against nature were run off or had mysteriously vanished many years ago, the curse lived on, claiming men from the tribe and those who took their women. It was never clear who the curse was going to afflict, but it followed the tribe like a shadow, always lurking behind them as they walked through the centuries. The Wendigo, as they called those who were afflicted with this curse, was a beast that tore the flesh from its victims and bathed in their blood. It was even known to enjoy the putrid delicacy that was rotting flesh, unearthing the dead when it felt the need, leaving nothing but scraps in its ravenous wake. It was rumored to have dug up hundreds of the surrounding tribes' graves and taken many more live victims, and the curse impacted all those who came in contact with the tribe. Because of this, these people were feared and rejected by all. This isolation, drawn up by the chieftains of old, allowed the neighboring tribes to live without incident for many years, until white men entered the land with small pieces of thin, flexible cloth with red wax on them, declaring that the natives were now on someone else's land and needed to relocate. When the wars had been fought and the white men had defeated the tribe's warriors, a truce was drawn. In the truce, there was a single condition which the chieftains demanded be met if the white men wished them to leave peacefully, that their tribes were to be relocated before the white men made contact with the tribe on the furthest edge of the marsh. Amused by the superstition of the chieftains, the white men agreed, keeping their word and allowing the tribes to leave before they made their way to the edge of the marshlands. The white men entered the marshes in the dead of night, and, after many days, found the tiny tribe living on a small plot of land. The men descended on the natives, demanding that the chieftain of the small tribe move his people from the marshes to a newly plotted reservation. In an attempt to appeal to the white men, the chieftain gave his only daughter to the leader of the group, Thomas Ditney. When Ditney looked upon the beautiful woman, her black hair held tight with intricate braids, eyes as dark as the night sky, lips as red and full as the wild rose petals she wore about her neck, he fell madly in love with her. He immediately drew up a truce with the chieftain, marrying the girl the next morning. With the truce, the people lived in harmony, often trading and socializing with one another. They threw raucous parties during the harvesting season and banded together in the bleakness of the winter months. The tribe was happy to have been accepted into the world again, and the white men found that the natives knew much about the land, including survival skills passed down through the tribe for centuries. All was peaceful, and, perhaps, this was one of the most amicable encounters between Indians and Americans for years to come. This unity, however, ended late one August evening, when the beautiful Indian wife of the newly appointed Governor Ditney ran screaming into the white village. Many of the villagers attempted to calm the woman down as she babbled on about an ancient curse. Her fit of hysteria continuing for nearly an hour before her face turned deadly pale and she dropped dead onto the square. Ditney, so broken by the sight of his dead wife, her once tanned face now pale and cold, was driven to the brink of sanity, forbidding anyone to move her body for burial. The men of the village tried to talk sense into the governor, but he persisted, stating that the next person to attempt to move the body would be given a death sentence. After his outburst, the governor locked himself in the upper room of his home, refusing to speak to a soul, and seeking comfort for his grief in solitude. The villagers would only see him at the first light of dawn, when he would slowly make his way to the body of his wife, laying a bouquet of wild roses in her hands before the sun had fully risen, scampering back to his home when done, running from the light as if the sun's rays would sear his very flesh. This continued on for a week, and, when the sun had set on the seventh day, the killings began. Men, women, and children were found slaughtered every night, stripped of flesh and devoid of blood. Even corpses began to be torn from their graves, bloated bodies missing rotting flesh. The villagers started to talk as the body in the square ripened, flesh peeling from the woman's bones in thin, crusted layers. They wondered, at first, in silence, why a dead body, laying in the open, would be left untouched by this creature. Certainly it would be easier to take a body in the open, rather than dig in the earth for one. As the days passed and more bodies were found, the townspeople began to wonder aloud, accusing Ditney of the heinous crimes. It seemed to be the only logical explanation. The untouched corpse had been his wife after all, and it was obvious that he'd been driven to insanity by her death. Soon, the townspeople showed up at Ditney's doorstep, demanding an answer, but they received none. They banged on the door until a frightened servant boy answered, his frail body being thrown aside as the men of the village assailed the house, searching for the absent governor. The people searched Ditney's home, overturning sealed government documents, and rummaging through his stores of rancid food. Blood covered the walls and, when the villagers had finally pushed their way into the upper room of the house, bodies laid strewn across the floor, their tongues swollen in their mouths as empty arteries looked angrily up at the men before them. Maggots littered the floor, crawling in and out of the bodies, the lifeless mounds undulating with the maggots' excursions. The flesh and muscle of the corpses had obviously been cleaved from the bone. The oldest bodies seemed to have been dismantled more methodically, done with a knife, each slice done with the skill of a surgeon. The fresher kills were done with much more haste, their limbs were torn in thick chunks, which dotted the room, thick gouges that seemed, almost, to have been done by powerful swipes of large claws. Many of the men became sick upon seeing the menagerie before them, letting loose the contents of their stomachs, mixing acid with putrid flesh. Those with stronger constitutions located the servant boy, hiding in a kitchen cupboard, and dragged him out into the square, beating the boy until he found himself able to provide the village with a suitable answer. It wasn't long until the child began to fear for his life, and, through swollen eyes and lips, he lied to the villagers. The boy could see the vehement anger on the faces of the men above him, as they spat and kicked him, and he feared that, if they blamed Ditney for the murders, he may be killed simply by association, if only to sate the town's anger. For this reason, the boy told them that the old chieftain had put a curse on the town and had used his daughter to carry it through the woods with her and into the White Village, setting up the house to make it look as if Ditney had done the crimes, murdering the grieving husband in the darkness of the night. Appalled by this new revelation and the savagery of the natives' ways, the villagers quickly assembled, leading an attack on the Indians. They raided the tribe and captured the chieftain. The old man tried to explain that the beast that was hunting them was not under his control nor that of the tribes, but the townspeople would not listen and a battle began, raging throughout the night. The white men emerged victorious and what was left of the tribe fled through the village, congregating in these very woods for safety. The first night the Indians set foot on this ground, that tree, Kyle indicated to his left, turning on his heel and stalking over to tree, running a hand along its bark for effect, was struck by lightning, the very moment a small boy, stabbed by one of the white men, died in his crying mother's arms. The Indians, who had taken to cremating the bodies of the dead to avoid their taking by the Wendigo, took this as a sign that this was a tree of death and that the dead should be turned to ashes in its base. As they burned both the bodies of the fallen warriors and the little boy, the crying mother, stricken with grief and covered in blood, walked to the outskirts of the woods, bringing with her an offering, and called out to the Wendigo. Never before had any of the tribe reached out to the creature, but the mother was determined to seek the revenge that she alone could not attain. After several hours, the Wendigo appeared before her, its large figure casting her in what seemed to be an eternal shadow. In the darkness, the mother fell to her knees, offering it a single wild rose, taken from the few that she had laid in her dead son's arms. The minuscule amount of humanity that was left in the beast was moved by the mother's grief, accepting the rose, and allowing her to speak. The woman pleaded for the beast to avenge her son by killing all the men that had attacked the village and to protect this land from the white men, so that he could live on for centuries, immortalized in the tree that became his final resting place. After the mother was sure that the Wendigo would keep its word, she bowed her head, knowing that no one who could ask such a creature a favor would live to speak of it. She waited in silence for a few moments before the Wendigo raised its mighty arm above her head, severing it from her shoulders with a single swipe. Randy jumped into me and Kyle looked back at us, smiling. At that moment, the ultimate payment had been made, and they say that to this day, the beast still wanders these woods, protecting the little boy's legacy, waiting for someone to desecrate the ground so that it can strike again. A rustling sounded from the bushes and Kyle spun around, his face going white. What is it?" Randy asked, wrapping his arms around my waist. "Knock it off, Kyle," I yelled, rubbing Randy's back soothingly, "you're scaring him." Before Kyle could respond, a black figure jumped from the bushes, tackling Kyle to the ground. He shrieked, "Randy! Randy, run!" Without question, Randy took off, sprinting into the woods and vanishing between the trees. "Randy! Randy, come back!" I called, turning when I heard the sound of raucous laughter from the two boys rolling on the ground. Jack pulled the black hood of his sweatshirt down, slapping a breathless Kyle on the back. "You see him run?" "Shut up. That was terrible." I clenched my fists before bending down, throwing leaves and sticks at the pair. "Whoa, whoa. Chels. Calm down. It was just a joke. We're less than a mile from my house. He'll be fine." Kyle stood, pinning my arms to my side as he spoke, trying to avoid the assailing foliage. He let me go as I covered my face, shaking my head. "He's just a kid, Kyle. You shouldn't scare him like that." I felt exhausted. Dealing with the two of them and their insensitive jokes was beyond tiring. All right. I'll make it up to him, tomorrow, and I'll call Mom to make sure he made it home safe, okay?" Kyle gave me a lopsided smile and I slowly acquiesced. Jack stood, stumbling slightly before regaining his balance. I couldn't help but chuckle. "You finished the rest of the beer?" Jack simply glared in response before the corners of his mouth turned upwards into a self-satisfied smirk. "Not all, but that does remind me." Jack walked over to the tree before unzipping his fly. I made a noise of disgust before covering my eyes, burying my face in the chest of a chuckling Kyle. "Let's see how Mr. Beastie likes that," Jack slurred slightly, walking over to his pack and picking it up with much more grace than I believed him capable of in his current state. Kyle gently lifted my chin up with his index finger, looking into my eyes. "Hey, there's an abandoned house up the way a bit. Why don't we sleep in there tonight, huh? A little bit more privacy." Kyle rubbed his nose against mine and I raised an eyebrow. "I don't think I've forgiven you quite yet." Kyle flipped his hair to the side, eyeing me closely with a grin. "Well, we've got all night now, don't we?" The walk to the abandoned house was relatively peaceful. The wind rustled the trees and though the discomfort I felt had failed to settle, Kyle's warm hand in mine grounded me, his thumb gently rubbing against my knuckles every so often. Kyle finally called home when we'd arrived at the dilapidated house and, after a good berating by his mother, confirmed that Randy had in fact made it home relatively safe, although rather out of breath. Kyle began to put down sleeping bags as Jack wandered around the house, picking at the peeling wallpaper, another beer in hand. When Kyle was finished setting up for the night, Jack coincidentally excused himself, disappearing out of the hole that had once sported a front door. Well, that was convenient timing. Kyle looked at me innocently, returning to his bag, searching for something in its depths. "It really was, wasn't it?" "Almost," he paused, pulling a single red rose from his pack, eyeing me from over the red petals, like we planned it. I smiled as he leaned in, pressing my lips against his as he slid the stem of the flower between my fingers. We talked for nearly an hour as I fingered the soft petals of the rose, careful to avoid its thorns. At first, we spoke of nothing, just little things about our time spent away at college, new friends we had made. It wasn't until I had finished my story about a particularly nasty professor that Kyle attempted to shift the conversation. "Listen, I know that we haven't seen eye to eye lately," he cleared his throat, "but I wanted you to know that I really do care about you, Anne." A scream tore through the woods, echoing off the empty, graffiti-covered walls. Kyle and I froze, looking toward the entrance of the house. "Jack!" Kyle called, his voice filled with trepidation as he reached for the flashlight next to us, turning the beam on with a click, and angled it out into the lawn. We both waited for a moment, straining to hear Jack yell back a slurred, sarcastic reply, but the only answer we received was the fluttering of an old shutter against the decaying drywall of the house. Jack, this isn't funny, man." Kyle's voice wavered slightly as he stood, making his way to the front steps. I kept my eyes trained on Kyle until he disappeared from sight. A sickening feeling had spread deep into the pit of my stomach, and the intense unease I had felt earlier began to return with renewed vigor. I stood quickly, moving to a broken window, peering out to try and see Kyle. He was sweeping the flashlight back and forth, muttering nervously under his breath. After a few moments, I made my way out into the overgrown lawn, stopping next to Kyle. "Kyle! Come on. He's probably just messing with us, that or the drunken idiot's fallen down somewhere." I nervously played with a thorn on the stem of the rose as we descended into the shrubbery, calling Jack's name out into the darkness. Eventually, we broke away from the brush, entering into a clearing, a road visible on the other side. There was a steep hill to our right, and I turned to scan its surface, assuming that Jack had attempted to drunkenly climb it. The lights from a passing car flashed across the field, and from the corner of my eyes, I caught the glimpse of something reflective. Kyle was still calling Jack's name and had retreated back to the tree line to continue to search. I stood still, surveying the hill as another set of headlights drew near, shining onto something scuttling up the hill. I narrowed my eyes, focusing on the creature while I moved closer. I made it to the base of the hill before I stopped, my heart dropping into my stomach as I attempted to swallow the thick lump that had formed in my throat. The thing was easily 6 feet tall, hunkering close to the ground as it moved on all fours in a sweeping gait. I could make out the contour of its spine poking through its reflective skin, its ribs jutting out with extreme emaciation. As it slinked forward, its wrists twisted unnaturally, and its thin legs strained as it pulled itself forward. I felt every hair raise on my skin, goosebumps spreading across my arms as I took an uneasy step backwards. My ankle twisted and I fell with a yelp, the thorns of the rose sinking into the firm flesh of my palm. Suddenly, the creature's head turned, empty sockets with an eerie yellow glow stared vacantly at me, as its mouth dropped open in what appeared to be a silent scream, taut cheeks pulling inwards. I nearly shrieked, covering my mouth with my hands as the thorns of the rose pierced my face. The thing let loose a sickening howl, its body contorting as it launched itself down the hill, barreling towards me. "Kyle! Kyle!" I turned on the spot, blood dripping down my hands as I clenched the rose in my fist, sprinting through the woods, the beam of Kyle's flashlight blinding me as I approached. "What? What is it?" I found Jack. The drunk idiot fell. I felt something grab my jacket, slicing my back as it pulled me from my feet. I slammed into the ground, a sickening crunch echoing somewhere behind my eyes. My vision swam and small gray dots burst in intricate patterns as I attempted to steady my gaze. It took me a moment to regain my sight and, when I did, I vomited onto my hands, the world spinning as tears began to leak from my eyes. I couldn't see Kyle, but Jack. The creature had sunk its claws into Jack's chest, hooking them between his ribs and violently pulling up. I saw the flesh of Jack's chest burst as his ribs were pulled through the ashen skin. The ringing in my ears masked his scream as the creature plowed him into the ground. Its other clawed appendage slid downwards, easily slipping into the soft flesh of Jack's stomach, his intestines falling from the gashes as he grabbed at them, attempting to pick them up and place them back inside the torn flesh. The ringing in my ears finally dulled as I tried to stand, but the world spun violently and I fell back to my knees. Something warm was rolling down my face and into my eyes. I tried to wipe it away, but the harder I tried, the more there seemed to be. I watched, horrified, as a long forked tongue emerged from the creature's mouth, stabbing into Jack's jugular, gurgling noises emanating from the creature's bobbing throat. I pushed myself to my feet and Crab walked away from the creature before falling into a ditch beside the dirt road. I landed on something soft and warm. I craned my neck to see the unconscious form of Kyle laying beneath me, his leg twisting at an odd angle. I fumbled in my pocket for my phone, the screen flashing as I unlocked it. Again, I heard a horrible howl as the creature swiped my phone from my hand, repeatedly slicing at it with its claws until the device turned black. I could hear its wheezing breath, and from where I was laying, I could clearly see it. Its skin was like a metallic, magnetic fluid, reflective with little spikes rising here and there as it moved, flattening into a glass when it stilled. It had no nose and its mouth an empty hole that seemed to have no end. I sobbed in abject fear as the creature turned to face me, its eyes swirling pools of electric yellow. Slowly, it turned its head to the side, a single bloody, clawed appendage reaching toward me. I screamed and it recoiled slightly before reaching out again, poking something in my hands. The rose. Its claws lightly traced the flower before it leaned in, its shuddering breath lightly teasing my face. Quickly, I was thrown to the side. I landed on my back against a tree a few feet away. I screamed as I watched the creature slice across Kyle's chest. "Please." My voice was hoarse and my body shook with sobs. "Please, don't kill him. Please." It turned its head to the side, much like a confused dog, before abandoning Kyle and approaching me again. Its face neared mine and I couldn't help but look away, shaking with fear. I felt the tongue of the creature trace my cheek, sliding along my neck and down my arm. I whimpered, expecting it to deliver a final blow, as I held my breath, clenching my eyes shut. Instead, I felt the creature wrench open my fist and pull the rose, its thorn still lodged in my palm, from my hand. My eyes opened instinctually and our gazes met for a brief moment. Then, without a sound, the creature turned, darting into the oppressing darkness and disappearing beneath the shadowy veil. The police say that a ranger found Kyle and I in the afternoon, 2 days later, unconscious and bleeding from several impressive wounds. They found the body of Jack, nearly 3 weeks later, nearly 30 miles from the site of the attack. The rangers deciding that he must have been dragged by the animal that had attacked us, although the report was scarcely detailed and no particular animal had ever been identified. Kyle, unfortunately, never fully recovered. The doctor said it was the trauma that made him lose his mind, ranting about a black creature that runs around the woods at night. Of course, I believed him, but the medication and therapy made me rethink the entire experience, eventually, coming to the conclusion that it had, in fact, been a bear that mauled us and not something from an Indian folktale. I returned to college in a year and my parents decided that we should move, to help me put the past behind me. I agreed and suggested somewhere in the city, far, far away from the woods. It wasn't until I moved into my new apartment, now many years later, that I realized I would never forget. As, even now, when I look out my apartment window into the small patch of woods behind my complex, I can see it there, staring back at me, patiently waiting. Because no matter how many variations of stories I read, or how many folklore specialists I consult, they can all say one thing for certain about the creature lurking amongst the trees: one never makes a bargain with the Wendigo and lives to tell the tale. Thanks a lot for watching the video till the end. Subscribe to our channel Horror in Detail. Drop your opinions/suggestions in the comments section, and like the video as it helps with the YouTube algorithm.